Imagine this. You're standing on the edge of a bright, impossible horizon, the kind that seems to hum with potential, as if the air itself were charged with your name. Your body knows what to do. Your hands are steady, your breath is calm, the path ahead is clear. Yet your feet do not move. A quiet tremor runs through you, not from danger, but from a possibility so vast it feels like a storm. You sense that if you take one step forward, you will never be able to return to the person you were 5 minutes ago. And a part of you, the part that loves familiar limits, clings to the edge while pretending it can't see the open sky. Why are you afraid of what you've begged for? Why, when the door finally opens, do you hesitate as though freedom were a trap? You've dreamed of the book you could write, the company you could build, the love you could finally risk, the voice you might reclaim. But when the moment arrives, when the room goes silent and the world makes space for you, you feel the old machinery of doubt turn on like a generator in the dark. Is it fear of failure? Perhaps, but be honest. Isn't it also fear of the magnitude of success? Of the pressure of being fully alive? Of being responsible for a self with no more excuses? Consider the paradox. You crave transformation but cling to the scaffolding of your current identity. You want to evolve, yet you're fiercely loyal to the habits that keep you small. You call them comfort, routine, predictability, but sometimes they are nothing but beautifully arranged cages, ornamented with reasons, lined with praise from people who'd prefer you stay understandable. What if the terror you feel is not a sign that you're unready, but a sign that you're close to something uniquely yours? What if the trembling is simply the nervous system's way of acknowledging a truth your mind can barely hold? That your life is not supposed to be a careful rehearsal for a quieter death. Listen to the questions that won't let you sleep. Who would you be if you finally stopped negotiating with your potential? What parts of your identity would dissolve if you moved like a person who trusts their own power? How many relationships, routines, and roles are calibrated to a smaller version of you? And what would happen to them if you dared to grow beyond their expectations? There is a hidden force beneath your hesitation, older than your memories and more persuasive than your reasons. It shapes your choices, edits your desires, and disguises itself as prudence. You feel it in the pull to delay, to research more, to wait for the right time, to ask for more signs even as the path crowds with them. What is this force? Where does it come from? And why does it wear so many respectable masks? Hold that question in your mouth like a match about to light. In the next breath, we will walk into the shadowed room where this force was born and name it. You step into the shadowed room and realize the force you're fighting isn't just fear. It's a covenant with who you've been. At its core is homeostasis, the body's quiet doctrine of keep things the same. Your nervous system treats radical possibility like a fever. It moves to cool you down. The unknown may hold triumph, but it also holds unpredictability, and your biology prefers the pain it understands to the freedom it can't measure. That is the first root. The second is older and subtler, the pact you made with your identity. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask you wear to be acceptable. You crafted it in school hallways, family dinners, early jobs, places where love and safety felt conditional. The persona keeps order, but it also keeps you edited. Your shadow, the parts of you exiled for being too intense, too ambitious, too sensitive, waits behind the curtain. When you approach your greatest potential, you approach the border where the persona ends and the shadow begins. Expansion demands integration, and integration feels like annihilation. No wonder you hesitate. Success would force a reunion with everything you pretended not to be. Then comes the question Nietzsche throws like a flare. What if fear isn't merely avoidance, but disguised will to power? The tremor you feel might not be weakness. It might be potential pressurizing your interior, searching for form. But will is costly. To will something great is to sign away the comforts of smallness. The abyss you stare into is not emptiness, it's responsibility. If you become who you could be, you must answer for the shape of the world your power touches. Greatness isn't a private dream, it's a public contract. Arthur Schopenhauer whispers another layer. Before you represent your life as a narrative, there is the raw, ceaseless force of wanting, the will. Desire is tidal. It surges toward more clarity, more beauty, more impact. But culture trains you to want safely, more applause, more followers, more of whatever doesn't threaten the tribe's expectations. So you amputate the desire that would unhouse you and nourish the desire that flatters you. You call it maturity. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is capitulation. Aldous Huxley warns that the doors of perception do not merely open outward, they also have bolts on the inside. You narrow your attention to the tolerable slice of reality that confirms who you've been. Anything that hints at your latent magnitude is filtered as noise. This is not random. It is curated blindness, an attentional economy managed by fear, habit, and reward. Sartre names the ruse bad faith, the art of pretending you are an object with fixed properties so you can avoid the agony of freedom. You say, "That's just not me," as though you were a cabinet of labeled drawers rather than an open field. You attribute your inaction to fate, timing, personality types, birth charts, anything to avoid the mirror of choice. But choice remains, patient and uncompromising. And then Frankel enters with a scalpel, meaning. He reminds you that survival is not enough. You hunger for purpose that justifies effort and suffering. Yet meaning always carries a clause, responsibility for your response. If your life can be meaningful, your refusal is not neutral. You are either moving toward the meaning that fits your soul or away from it with exquisite rationalizations. The more accurate your calling, the louder your excuses. Why? Because the most dangerous path to your old identity is the one paved with plausible reasons. Society compounds this. It rewards predictability, legibility, and compliance. Families unconsciously calibrate around the known you. Friends co-sign your limits because your growth would force theirs. Schools train recall over originality. Workplaces exalt busy certainty over courageous doubt. These are not villains. They are human systems engineered for stability. But stability unchecked becomes a velvet prison. So the hidden problem is a trinity. Biology guarding equilibrium. Identity guarding acceptance. Culture guarding order. Together, they weave a sophisticated anesthesia. You remain awake enough to function, numb enough to avoid transformation, and clever enough to rename paralysis as prudence. You don't fear failure. You fear the funeral of the self that failure would require, or the coronation that success would force. Yet anesthesia wears off. The door you've ignored keeps appearing in dreams, in envy, in the ache that arrives when someone else does what you know you're meant to do. You sense consequences ripening in silence. What do they look like when they arrive? What happens to a life that keeps negotiating with its birthright? Step closer. In the next room, the bill comes due. You enter the room, and it's not dramatic. No alarms, no collapse, just a subtle rearrangement of gravity. The bill for avoiding your potential is itemized in small, almost invisible costs that compound until they feel like fate. At first, it's a sigh after a meeting, a slight envy at someone else's announcement, a restless scroll before bed. Then, the costs grow interest. Your days begin to shape themselves around the path of least resistance. Status quo bias keeps you orbiting familiar routines, convincing you that what is known is safer than what is true. Loss aversion whispers that the risks of becoming are heavier than the risks of staying. You tell yourself you're being prudent, but prudence, calcified into habit, becomes a sarcophagus you design from the inside. Neurologically, your brain is a prediction machine built to minimize surprise. Each time you approach a threshold of growth and retreat, you're training your nervous system to associate expansion with danger. The amygdala fires, cortisol rises, and the prefrontal orchestra that could compose a new future quietly puts down its instruments. Over time, the circuitry of avoidance becomes efficient. The moment you feel the heat of possibility, your body reaches for the nearest fire extinguisher. Email, snacks, obligations, noble emergencies. You don't call this fear, you call it being responsible. Confirmation bias joins in. You selectively attend to evidence that supports the safer story. You notice examples of people who tried and failed, not the thousands who failed forward or succeeded quietly. You hear the one critical comment and build a cathedral around it. Meanwhile, the default mode network, the brain's narrative engine, keeps rehearsing the identity you've always performed. The more you repeat it, the more it feels inevitable. Repetition simulates truth. Culturally, the consequences multiply. You curate a self that earns approval, and approval is addictive. Social algorithms reward predictability and outrage, not depth and becoming. So you slice your soul into content, and the metrics smile while the self goes silent. At work, you become the reliable one who never threatens the hierarchy. In friendships, you play the part others need so the group remains intact. Families, loving, anxious, human, subtly penalize deviation. The machine prefers you legible. You comply and call it harmony. Then there is the quiet grief of unused gifts. Hedonic adaptation ensures that even your small wins flatten into routine. What once felt like progress begins to taste like maintenance. You sense a gap widening between the life you're living and the life that would require your full vocabulary of courage. The gap has symptoms: irritability, mystifying fatigue, a craving for novelty that never satisfies. An ache when you see someone doing what you buried. You tell yourself you're just tired. But weariness is sometimes the body's way of protesting a counterfeit life. Imposter syndrome grows in this soil, not because you are an imposter, but because performing a smaller self produces a constant dissonance. You achieve, maybe even impress, but the applause lands on a version of you that isn't fully true. The more people praise the mask, the lonelier the wearer becomes. This is a success-shaped emptiness, and it is hard to diagnose because it looks like winning. The societal cost is subtler but brutal. When individuals refuse their potential, the common starves of originality. Institutions grow heavier, fed by compliance but deprived of vision. We inherit systems designed for problems we no longer have because the minds that could redesign them learned to sit still. Stagnation disguises itself as stability until a crisis exposes the rot, and still the consequences keep returns. Every avoided threshold becomes harder to cross, not because the door shrinks, but because the story you tell about the door develops barbed wire. It's too late. I miss the wave. Others need me to be this way. Maybe in another life. Each sentence is a small theology, and you begin to worship at its altar. But in the quiet, a countercurrent builds. The envy that once embarrassed you starts to feel like a compass, pointing not at what they have, but at what you've hidden. The fatigue sharpens into clarity. It isn't rest you need, it's integrity. The nervous system that once panicked at possibility begins to stabilize when you imagine a life aligned with what you know. You catch yourself mid-scroll, mid-excuse, and a single insurgent thought arrives. What if the risk of becoming is now smaller than the cost of staying? The room tilts. The bill is on the table, unpaid but illuminated. You cannot unknow this accounting. And once you see it, the old anesthesia stops working. Something in you, older than fear, younger than regret, reaches for the doorknob. On the other side is not safety, but sovereignty. The rebellion begins where your excuses end. Rebellion doesn't begin with a trumpet. It begins with a refusal so quiet it feels like a change in temperature. I will not betray myself today. You don't wait for courage to swell like a tide. You move while afraid and let courage catch up. This is the first counterintuitive shift. Action precedes clarity. You've been bargaining for certainty as if it were a passport. In truth, certainty is the stamp you get after you've already crossed the border. Start small. Start daily. Start now. 5 minutes of the life you want recalibrates more circuitry than 5 hours of rumination. Set a micro-bravery quota. One visible move per day that embarrasses your old persona. Send the email you've rewritten 12 times. Publish the paragraph. Ask for the meeting. Make the offer. Each act is a wedge driven into the old narrative, prying open daylight. Your nervous system learns not from your promises, but from your patterns. Feed it a new pattern. Name the enemy correctly. Not fear, avoidance. Fear is data. Avoidance is policy. Keep the fear, change the policy. When the tremor arrives, say, "Of course you're here," and move anyway. Treat anxiety like weather. Dress for it, don't worship it. If your hands shake, let them, and write the thing with shaking hands. The body doesn't need you to be fearless. It needs you to be consistent. Practice identity lag. Your actions will become true before your feelings do. Imagine yourself as a runner who laces up before they feel like it and trusts that the feeling will arrive at mile 3. You are not faking. You are rehearsing the person you are committed to becoming. The mask you're wearing now is not the persona. It's the rehearsal mask for a truer face. Integrate the shadow. Make a list of traits you've disowned. Too intense, too ambitious, too sensitive, too proud. For each, ask, how would this energy look in service of my highest aim? Intensity becomes devotion. Ambition becomes stewardship. Sensitivity becomes precision. Pride becomes guardianship of standards. The parts you exiled are not monsters. They are muscles you never learned to use. Design your environment to conspire with your future. Don't just have willpower. Make willpower irrelevant. Remove friction for the work that matters. Tools laid out the night before. Calendar protected like a sanctuary. Phone exiled during creation. Add friction to the counterfeit. Uninstall the seductive app. Cancel the trivial obligation. Create a speed bump before every old impulse. You are building a cathedral for concentration. Treat your attention like stained glass. Adopt an anti-goal, a list of outcomes you refuse to tolerate. Work that leaves you hollow. Applause that requires disguise. Relationships that punish growth. When an opportunity appears, measure it against the anti-goal first. This prevents you from upgrading the prison. Institute a failure quota. Choose a number of deliberate attempts per week that might not work. Pitches, drafts, prototypes, and hit the number no matter what. You don't control results. You control attempts. Failure ceases to be a verdict and becomes your cardiovascular training. This is rebellion against perfectionism's tyranny. Run 30-day revolutions. Choose one arena: health, craft, money, relationship, and conduct a live experiment with measurable rules. At the end, keep what works, discard what doesn't, and roll into the next experiment. You are iterating a self, not declaring one. Loyalty tests every relationship, including the one with yourself. Does this connection love me as I become? Some will tighten around your ankle. Love them without letting them anchor you. Rebellion is not cruelty, it is clarity. You are not abandoning people. You are abandoning a dynamic that requires your smallness to survive. Look to those who broke rank. A prisoner writes a book in a camp and reclaims meaning. A statesman studies law in a cell and emerges with a nation in his chest. A scientist refuses consensus and is exiled by peers until the cosmos itself becomes evidence. Their secret isn't superhuman strength, it's relentless alignment, habits stacked upon habit until the world must adjust to the gravity of a single life. Finally, appoint an inner council, the future you who knows, the present you who acts, the past you who witnesses without veto. Let them meet each morning. Ask, what is the smallest decisive act today that honors the largest truth I carry? Do that, then another. Revolutions, despite the posters, are built from quiet yeses made on unremarkable days. The hinges creak. The door you feared is opening because you are pushing. On the threshold waits a realization with teeth, one that will not let you return to sleep. You cross the threshold, expecting fireworks, and meet something quieter, an atmosphere in which the furniture of your old identity looks strangely too small. The final realization arrives not like a shout, but like a tuning fork struck inside your chest. You never feared your power. You feared the funerals your power would require. Your greatest potential is not a prize. It is a pilgrimage. It asks you to bury versions of yourself that kept the tribe comfortable and to love the world enough to risk becoming unrecognizable to it. Here is the paradigm shift. Potential is not a destination where you finally deserve yourself. It's a responsibility that begins the moment you accept reality as malleable under your hand. You are not waiting for a sign from outside. You are the sign. The trembling you've misread as weakness is the felt sense of meaning drawing near, a biological alarm that the soul's work is at the door. Fear does not mean stop. Fear means pay attention. It is the bell that rings when you are in the vicinity of what matters most. The old question, who am I to do this, collapses under a truer one. Who am I not to, given what I know? The universe may be indifferent to your comfort, but it conspires with your integrity. When you align action with what is most deeply true, coincidences begin to look like choreography. Doors you could not budget for swing open not because fate changes its mood, but because you stopped arguing with your assignment. You realize that identity was never a museum. It is a river. The self you protect is a snapshot of water you have already become. To clutch it is to drown. The only stability given to a human being is the stability of direction. You do not promise to be the same. You promise to be faithful to the next right step. In that fidelity, courage stops being an event and becomes architecture. Another reversal. Success is not the proof of your potential. Service is. The measure is not applause, but contribution. Not how loudly the world echoes your name, but how clearly your work relieves its suffering or enlarges its sense of the possible. To choose your potential is to volunteer for stewardship of your craft, your influence, your consequences. Greatness is not glamorous up close. It is a form of caretaking, and yet there is beauty. When you consent to the work that is yours, your life gains the texture of necessity. The envy quiets into admiration. The fatigue metabolizes into endurance. The restless scroll gives way to presence. You begin to experience time not as a corridor of delays, but as a field of appointments you are finally keeping. The world does not become easier, it becomes legible. So what is the ultimate truth? That the person you are capable of becoming is not a stranger waiting at the horizon. It is the most honest reading of the person you already are. Potential is not a fantasy self. It is the unedited self acted upon. The path is not toward an image, but toward coherence. You feared your potential because it demanded that you stop negotiating with your life. Stand here and test it. Ask the simplest, fiercest question. What is the smallest act today that would make tomorrow unarguably different? Do it without ceremony. Then another. Surrender the theater of transformation and assume the labor. Let love, not sentiment, but the disciplined preference for what is true, govern your choices. Now look up. The horizon hasn't moved. You.